Sweet Peas 101. Today we're going to be talking about all of the different things that you need to know if you want to be growing my most favorite, fragrant, beautiful, amazing sweet peas. Let's go. The first thing I want to share with you is type. What type of sweet pea do you want to grow if you're looking for cut flowers in particular? There are a couple varieties that are really meant for longer stems. The Spencer sweet peas and also the elegant sweet peas tend to have longer stems. Now that being said, I am in a hot climate. I'm not in the ideal growing zone for sweet peas, which is temperate areas like England, where it's nice and temperate and moist and humid. Sweet peas love that. They do not love arid, hot, dry Colorado, so I have to work within that. So that will affect your stem length. Is if you're in an ideal climate and maybe not as sunny as I am, then it's more likely that your stems are going to be a little bit more elongated, the plants are going to be happier, so the stems will be longer. But that to say, I am still able to get good length out of my sweet peas, and part of that is timing. I remember sweet peas and peas are two different things, okay? Sweet peas are not edible. Peas obviously are edible, so make sure you're differentiating. Don't try to eat your sweet peas, not a good idea. Sweet peas grown for the flower. So let's talk about timing next. Now, sweet peas are one of the ones that I do have to start early. So here we are, it is January in my zone 5-6, last frost of mid-May, and I am already starting my sweet peas. In fact, I have a whole tray behind me here, and I have a batch that I've already pre-sprouted, and that is because of the timing of sweet peas. I mentioned that my zone gets pretty hot in the summertime, and that means that I have to get a jump on my sweet peas. I need to get them out early. Peas, in general, prefer cooler temperatures, and this is true of sweet peas as well. Now in my zone, as soon as we hit last frost, usually our temperatures skyrocket and it gets hot right away. So I don't want to wait until my last frost date. I'm starting them now. I am growing them for about 8 weeks, and I am planting them out 8 weeks before my last frost. Usually the guideline for that is right around St. Patrick's Day, so mid-March, maybe into late March. But again, we want the sweet peas to be establishing when the temperatures are cool and when it's a little bit humid and cooler in the air. That's how they're going to get the best jump on growth. Now, that being said, we have to duplicate that in our growing environment. So what we don't want to do, because they're going to be going out so early, we don't want to grow them warm in a warm greenhouse or in your warm home, and then try to transplant them out 8 weeks before last frost, because they are going to go into shock with that kind of temperature change. To go from 70 degrees to, in my zone, what can be in the teens, too much of a jump. So when I'm starting them as seedlings, I am growing them cold. So here we are in my greenhouse. I am not heating it right now. So during the daytime, our temperatures are about 30. Now in the greenhouse, it gets up to maybe low 60s, maybe even the 70s when the sun is out. And that's okay during the day, and they have nice bright sun. At night, it can go down into the 20s, even into the upper teens in this greenhouse. And you can go watch our greenhouse video to see how we regulate the temperature in here. But that is the growing condition that you need for sweet peas. This presents some difficulties if you're growing at home and you don't have a greenhouse, because where in your home is protected enough that they're not going to freeze solid, okay? We don't want them dropping below, I'd say 17 or 18 degrees Fahrenheit at night. That's going to be too cold even for sweet peas. But where can you put them that they're going to get nice bright sun during the day, not too warm? You really don't want them inside your warm house all of the time. Having those cool nights is going to help slow their growth and keep them from getting too spindly. So often what I see when people are growing sweet peas is they grow too fast, and then they get really, really leggy. That's because they're growing them inside under lights. It's too warm of a situation for sweet peas. They want to be grown colder, slower. So 4 to 6 weeks to me is not long enough, because I'm growing them cold. That's what they want. They're gonna be much happier when they're planted out. Now that being said, I have had them frost pinch, so because it drops down into the 20s in this greenhouse at night, and sometimes I think we've gotten down to 17 or 18 in here, that will kill off a little bit of the growth on the top of that sweet pea. But that serves as nature's pinch. So it's pinching down the growth, and that way we're getting more stems. If we don't pinch, what we're gonna get is one long stem, and that one can kind of get a little bit leggy, like I mentioned. I really recommend a nice pinch on your sweet peas. So by growing them in a cool environment, you'll probably get that pinch naturally. If you don't grow them in a cool environment, you're going to want to pinch them once they've got their second or third set of leaves. Just pinch them down, they'll start to branch out. So again, a little bit hard if you're doing this in an indoor environment, because you don't want them too warm. If you have to grow them inside and that's your only option, Find the coolest spot in your house where they can still get nice bright light, ideally direct sun and a supplemental grow light. So remember, we use LED shop lights. You can see all this in our greenhouse seed starting setup video. You don't need a fancy grow light. That plus sun is going to give you a nice bright light for your sweet peas, but make sure it's not getting too warm under those lights. So that's why LEDs are good, because they don't get hot. Ideally, you're going to be putting them into a cooler place at night. So into a garage that's unheated, for example, would be a good place. Make sure they are still getting cold temperatures to help slow that growth, keep them from getting leggy. But ideally, you're hitting around mid 50s to 60s during the day, and at nighttime you're getting down into the 30s. That being said, we are planting them out before we're past our frost date. So there are times when in April we will drop down into the single digits. So the question is, do I cover them after I plant them out? Yes, I do. If we're going to drop below kind of that 20-degree range and we're not getting snow, then I will cover them. If we're getting snow, no need to cover them. That snow is going to insulate the sweet peas, and you don't have to cover. The snow serves as the insulation, and covering them can do more harm than good. But if we're getting very, very cold temperatures and no snow, then yes, I will often drape some cotton over them. Some muslin will work, or a frost fabric if you have it will also work, a cotton sheet. Just make sure you're propping it up with something so that it's not smashing down those sweet peas. 99% of the time, the failures that I see in sweet peas is because you're growing them too warm. Very, very bright light, cold temperatures. All right, let's move on to actually starting them. So I've got some seeds here. Like I mentioned, I've already got these and started. These are Spencer Ice Cream, which are kind of a white. I love a white sweet pea, especially mixed with a blue sweet pea. What I do is I sprout them. So there is a lot of debate in the seed growing world about sweet peas in particular, and should you pre-soak them or nick them? There are kind of, people out there who will tell you that you need to do that to get them to germinate. We've done side-by-side tests where I have done pre-sprouting this way in a paper towel, putting them directly into a tray, soaking them and nicking them. Soaking them and nicking them did nothing. There was no advantage that I saw to doing that. So instead, what I do, because sweet peas take up a lot of room in my greenhouse, they need a deep root, and we'll talk about this next. But because of that, what I do is I do pre-sprout them. So you can see here is a sweet pea that I have pre-sprouted. Now I haven't soaked it. I didn't nick it or any of that. All I did was I took my peas, I rubbed them with a little bit of a pre-inoculant from Bigfoot, and that is specifically made for peas to help them fixate nitrogen from the air. Usually we do that with cover crops to help get nitrogen down into the soil, but you can do it with any peas in general. It will help them grow, it will help them fixate nitrogen, and they'll be healthier plants overall. I wrap them up in a piece of flannel, damp flannel, and then I wrap them in, you could do a Ziploc bag if you don't have these, but I prefer to use these beeswax coated fabric pieces, and that way you're not having to use plastic. So I'm just going to wrap this up, and then I put it into a dark area. So usually I bring this inside for pre-sprouting into a room that's around 70 degrees just for that germination stage. So I'm going to bring these inside, and then I'm going to open them every couple days and see what has sprouted. As they sprout, I transplant them into their seed starting area. So whether that's a tray or a soil block or whatever it is you're using, we'll talk about those options next. But I do like to do that first because, again, this helps me to save space. Because the sweet peas take up a lot of room and I start so many, I don't want to have wasted space, and I also don't want to have empty seed trays, and then I don't want to have to be buying twice as much seed as I need and starting two in each. So that's why I pre-sprout. You don't have to pre-sprout. You could just put them right into your soil blocks or your seed starting trays, keep the soil damp, and then start them that way. So that being said, sweet peas need darkness to germinate, so make sure that they are covered with soil if you're starting them in trays. Again, if you're starting them like this, I recommend using a dark fabric. You can see this piece of flannel is kind of dark, and then I wrapped it up in here and I put it in a dark cabinet in my house. Just make sure you don't forget to check on them every day and make sure that they've germinated, because if you miss it by a few days, they'll get long and leggy inside here. Get them transplanted as soon as they're sprouted, just like I showed you. Okay, so that's a little bit about pre-sprouting. Now, why don't I just directly seed these into the ground? I get that question a lot, why go to all this work to start them inside? It's because, like I mentioned, these need to be establishing in cooler temperatures, but the soil temps are usually still too cold in mid-March for these to germinate on their own. If I start them directly in the ground, our soil temperatures in mid-March are still in the 20s. That's too cold for these guys to germinate. They'll germinate in around the mid-30s soil temps, but for me, that's not usually until April, and even then it's getting a little bit late. Like I said, they really prefer cool temperatures. We've talked a little bit about temperatures and timing. Now I want to talk about what I'm starting them in. So for years, this has been a problem for me because you all know how I feel about plastic seed trays. I don't like them. I don't like storing them. I don't like using them. I don't like buying more plastic. I don't like the fact that they're not recyclable, blah, blah, blah. I could go on for hours, but I don't like using the plastic seed trays. But with sweet peas, it's difficult because peas have a very deep taproot. That means the first root that they put out is really, really long. And what can happen if we're starting them in soil blocks is that they reach the bottom of the soil block and immediately they go out. And they tend to go out far and seeking out deeper ground. So this can be a problem with soil blocks because what happens is they hit down and then they get spread out and then they start looking for other soil. So we've had them grow into one another. And this is a problem with sweet peas. It's not a big deal with other seeds. A lot of our seeds grow together during soil blocking. Not a problem, but with sweet peas, it's an issue because sweet peas don't like root disturbance. So if they start growing and intertangling their roots, and then you're trying to jostle them and pull them apart, they really hate that. And as soon as you plant them out, they're going to stop growing for 3 to 4 weeks because they're just kind of recovering from all that jostling that you've done. I'm not saying that they won't grow if they get root disturbance. They still will, but they take a while to rebound from that transplant, which is the same reason I don't like to grow them in trays. If you're growing in trays, you're kind of jostling them around. Often you have to pinch the sides to get them out or use some kind of tool. And then they're just used to the confines of that little plastic seed tray. So when you grow them in a soil block, and what happens then is those roots are air pruned and they're growing right to the edge of the block. And as soon as that block hits the soil, whoosh, those roots spread out and they're ready to go. The transplant shock is much less with soil blocks, but I couldn't figure out how to do this in soil blocks because they're shallow. Even the bigger 2-inch soil blocks like these ones are not that deep, not for a sweet pea. So we tried a few other things. We've tried growing them in toilet paper rolls. People, I'm sure you'll see it this spring, people saying grow them in toilet paper rolls. It did not work for me, okay? I tried it 2 years in a row. We had problems like the toilet paper rolls would fall apart. The toilet paper rolls would rot. We started then kind of grouping them together so they wouldn't fall apart, but then they started to mildew and rot in between. The soil would start to fall at the bottom of the toilet paper roll. And then when we took the toilet paper rolls and tried to plant them in, all the soil would fall out the bottom. It was just, I did not feel like that was a better option. And also there's been some rumors of PFAS being in toilet paper rolls. So I just don't like using them. So then we tried using deep root trainers, but those are plastic trays. I don't like that either. Well, that did work okay. I felt like there was still a fair amount of root disturbance. So this is what I'm doing this year, is I've started growing them in 2-inch soil blocks, one stacked on top of the other. So you can see what I mean here. They look like little brownie pops. And what I've done is I've taken the 2-inch soil blocks and I've stacked one on top of the other. Then I've inserted a little wooden dowel into each one just to keep it stable. This seems to be a great option. They are nice and sturdy. They are not growing into each other. It's a much deeper soil block for them to be able to put their taproots down and into. I am pretty happy with this. I'm gonna kind of be keeping an eye on it as we go here to see how they perform. And I will update you when it's time to plant these out. We'll show what that looks like. But all that to say, if you have 2-inch soil blocks and you're doing sweet peas, try this, give this method a try. And if you're just using regular seed trays, please try to seek out the deepest one you can because they are not gonna like being started in a small, shallow seed tray. So if you're just looking to start sweet peas and you wanna go ahead and tune out now, that's fine. If you're looking for a little bit more information in terms of transplanting and soil preferences, keep watching. They're going to want a nice, rich soil. I mentioned before mounding our beds. So the reason we're able to plant so early is because we plant these into mounded beds. So that means the soil is elevated. It thaws more quickly than our in-ground soil. So we are able to work that soil a little bit easier. We're also able to amend that soil a little bit easier. So we just pile it up. I don't even use sides. This is not like a raised bed situation. It's just a mound. And then we bury some composted, aged manure in the bottom. I like sheep manure. We just put a scoop down into the bottom as we're planting. That way as the roots reach down, there's some food for them. And then we heavily mulch around that mound. So by mulching around the mound, we're gonna help keep the soil temperatures cooler, which is what the sweet peas want. So we're keeping the temperatures cooler, especially around the roots of the sweet peas. So that's where you wanna focus on keeping things cool. So this is a great opportunity to also interplant. So you can plant these around the base of larger perennials that will help keep the soils cooler as the sweet peas are growing and it's later in summer. They also do like regular moisture. Like I mentioned, they like regular, but again, we have put some aged manure down and into their planting hole and they're able to use that all season. You will also want to regularly deadhead your sweet peas. So you might have watched our video from a couple years ago where I was talking about how I made a mistake in planting way too many sweet peas. I got very overly ambitious and I said, I'm gonna plant a whole 75-foot row of sweet peas, which was great and beautiful and fragrant and amazing, but I could not keep up with deadheading them. And if you want flowers into August and into the hot temperature time of the year, you're going to want to deadhead your sweet peas. That means every time they are done flowering, cut off that stem, cut off the flower stem. Don't let it go to seed. Once that plant starts producing its seed, it's gonna slow down on blooms. It's gonna tell the plant, okay, time to shut down. We're going into seed production. We're done. So try to keep them deadheaded as regularly as you can. That means you're probably not gonna wanna grow that many. I'm only growing, well, I'm growing probably too many. I think I'm growing 100 this year, and that's more than enough for myself to have nice full vases all summer and also to have some to sell. Don't overdo it because again, you're gonna wanna deadhead them if you want to keep those blooms continuously going. Now in terms of pests, the number one pest that we deal with on sweet peas are aphids. And aphids really like the nice, fresh, quick green growth that happens with sweet peas. So you get a lot of growth with sweet peas because they're a climber. And especially if you're feeding them and you've given them some nice rich soil, they're gonna put on some growth quickly. Any growth that comes on quickly that is fresh and new and green is going to be a target for aphids. So aphids is probably the number one problem that we see on sweet peas. We have been able to mitigate it through plantings in the area and around the perimeter of our garden of things like yarrow, umbral flowers like golden Alexander, which is a native, is a great one for attracting ladybugs, which are going to in turn take care of those aphids for us. But all that to say, try to avoid over fertilizing your sweet peas. So I mentioned I put a scoop of aged manure into the planting hole at planting time. I don't do additional fertilization on top of that. If you're in a clay soil, you probably will be in the same boat with me. If you're in a sandier soil, you might need to do a little bit of supplemental fertilizing, but don't overdo it on the fertilizer because that's when you're gonna get a lot of aphid issues. Okay, the last thing I'm gonna say about growing is that there is a whole school of thought around pinching to one main shoot or letting them branch and put off multiple shoots. Remember that pinching that we got early on and we got all that branching? So at that point, a lot of growers will just select one, like the thickest, longest of all of the sprouts from the sweet pea. They'll select that one to grow and to train up. So that is gonna be the one they're gonna say, okay, this is gonna be the one that we're going to let be the main producer, and then they pinch off all the other side branches. So the benefit of doing that in theory is that you get longer stems from the sweet peas. It's putting all of its energy into one of those shoots instead of into multiple different shoots. So if you're going for height of your plant, or if you're going for long stems, pinching to one main shoot of your sweet peas can be a good idea. And that being said, it's time consuming. So when we did do this, it was a dedicated every few days we had to go in there and pinch off all the side shoots. If you know you're not that kind of person, don't even bother. But it did result in stems that were maybe an inch longer than the other ones. So there is that benefit. Now, the other way to do it, and this is the way that I do it, is I just let all of the sweet peas, after I pinch it and there's multiple shoots coming off, I just let them all grow. That results in a bushier plant, but maybe not quite as tall. So the other downside of letting all of those side shoots grow is that they can kind of grow together. They kind of intertangle with each other. And so when you're trying to cut them, the pea tendrils will kind of curl around the neighboring branches and it can be a little bit of a mess to try to harvest them. So if you're growing them, so this would be my recommendation. If you're growing them for a cut flower and you know you want to be going for stem length, you want to be going for ease of harvest, then it might be best to grow sweet peas and train them to one main shoot. Otherwise, I'd say if you're a home gardener, If you're not so worried about necessarily stem length, then go ahead and just let all the branches grow. Nobody has time for all that pinching, and just know that you'll get maybe a little bit smaller, shorter stems, but a bushier plant overall. So that brings me to training. Like I mentioned, training these up, they will climb. So if you can give them something smaller to climb, that is usually best. They don't necessarily love to wrap around larger things. No, that's not necessarily true. So I usually need to get them started on something. So they start out kind of slow, and the first couple weeks of growth are a little bit, it doesn't look like much is happening, and then all of a sudden you'll start to see them shoot up. So you need to be prepared with a trellis of some sort. I've used things like curly willow in the past for a pretty natural kind of trellis for them to grow up, and you can grow a whole sweet pea wall doing it that way. Or you could give them wire to climb, jute netting to climb. Any of those things would work, but you are going to want to have some kind of trellis plan ready to go, because otherwise your sweet peas are going to sprawl out along the ground. They're going to be targeted, so slugs and that kind of thing. So be ready when you're planting. Have your trellis structure ready to go and in place, because what you don't want to happen is for your sweet peas to start growing and then you're having to scramble and try to get a trellis in place. In terms of using sweet peas for cut flowers, I mentioned they're one of my favorite cut flowers. However, they don't have the longest vase life. So usually I'm looking at maybe 4 days out of a bunch of just straight sweet peas. Now, that being said, if you want to cut more sweet pea and have it last a little bit longer, don't feel limited to just cutting the flower part. You can actually cut the vine and use the vine in your bouquets, in your arrangements, because it's got this nice viney, tendrily texture. And so it really adds a lot to your vases. If you're looking for something that's got that kind of romantic, wild look, cut some of the vines too, because the vine, the greenery of the sweet pea lasts much longer than the flower. So the vine can keep going in your vase even after the flower has faded. You can just snip off the flower and let the vine keep serving as greenery. All right, guys, that's it, your sweet pea growing guide, Sweet Peas 101. I hope that you enjoyed this video and all of this information about sweet peas. Coming up next, we're gonna be talking about all the things that I'm starting right now for my zone 5-6 here in January, all the early things, all of the cool flowers, and we also have some new garden plans coming out this spring for you if you are interested in growing flowers and cover cropping together. We're gonna have some plans coming out for that, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to subscribe if you like this video and if you wanna see more from us. And otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It means a lot to us here at the farm to have you guys tune in, so we appreciate you. And we'll see you guys around here next time at the farm. Okay, so I mentioned that they like cold temperatures. This is true even when they're growing. Now that being said, I can get sweet peas to bloom for me. I've gotten them all the way through August by doing some of the following things I'm gonna tell you about. Our temperatures in August are very hot. We're into the hundreds, so sweet peas don't love it, but if you can find a spot where they get a little bit of afternoon shade, full sun in the morning is best, but a little bit of afternoon shade if you're in a hot zone, and also mulching your roots. Here's the palette. All the growing information. What else should I show?